Welcome to another episode of Navigating Now. This is episode 189, and I am so excited to bring Jonathan Perez on our session today. You might notice that he's a familiar face for our listeners. We'll unpack that a bit, but today we're going to talk about personality assessments, specifically that we need to stop taking them so personal. Personality assessments. So excited to unpack this with Jonathan. So let's bring him on in.
Hey,
Hey there, welcome.
thank you. All right.
Are you amped? Are you excited to have this conversation?
I am. I know we've been talking about how to make sure we get to the points without talking for 2 days. So we got
Yes.
this.
Yes. Yeah, well, that's what happens, right? When you're very passionate about a subject and you just want to go deep into it. So, for our listeners, you'll know that both of us are very excited about this conversation. But before we unpack that, let's unpack you a little bit. So, this isn't your first time on Navigating Now. What's your storyline? Where are you coming in from?
Yeah. So when I came on, I think it was almost a year ago. Yes, I was always fascinated by the team and everything that Thought Team was doing. And as of, I think, what, a couple, 3 weeks ago now as part of the official team. And there you go. Thank you for helping me out. It's felt like a lot more than that at this point. But yes, yeah, I was very, very excited to be part of a passionate team doing the work I love. And so, yeah, I'm honored to be here.
So is it fair to say you're on Navigating Now, and ever since then, you're like, how do I get onto this team and being surrounded by these people and the work that they do that much
You
more?
can absolutely say that. So I was finding a way in there. Yeah.
I love it. Well, we're so happy to have you just generally and especially for this episode. So again, we're going to unpack personality assessments in work, how they support us as human beings, but especially as professionals as well. So where is your energy, Jonathan? Where do you want us to kind of kick off with this?
Yeah. Well, I know we were looking at the title and we said, okay, maybe someone looking at this might ask, well, what do we mean by not taking it so personal? And so,
Yep.
I thought it would be cool for us to share our own personal perspectives on it because as we were talking about it, I think the main thing that sparked the interest in having this conversation is for me personally, it was the huge resistance I used to have to personality assessments. As a matter of fact, people would offer them to me or they would say, hey, here's this assessment that we're going to have you take. And I remember feeling this urge in me that would say, how is this thing going to tell me about who I am and who I'm not? It doesn't know me. And I would actually have a huge resistance to it. And so it wasn't until I got a little bit curious and said, okay, what is this all about? That actually, when I took it, I ended up reading it just to see what it had to say. And I thought, actually, some of this stuff is pretty accurate.
Not far off. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I said, okay, let's just look at what's here. And so it helped me understand that there actually is some value in it. And rather than identify with every single thing in there, I can be curious and see what value I can get from it. So in essence, one of the other things I noticed in my experience was that, especially the things that it says to watch out for, or like, hey, you might be this way, or these might be the behaviors that aren't supporting you. Another thing I resisted was like, nope, that's not something I'm working on, or that's not something I need to do. And so I would take it personal in that sense that I would be not really getting the most value from it for that reason. And so it sparked this conversation because I have a much different belief about them now. Yeah, and so that's how our conversation started around these personality assessments.
Yeah. Oh, so much to unpack there already. So what I hear is, first off, you started with like this, you were resistant to it. So how can it know more about me than I know about myself? Which, for one, acknowledging you're a very self-aware person. So I could imagine when you're being given a new assessment to take to build your self-awareness, it's like, well, what else can you really tell about me? But then you brought in curiosity and like, okay, maybe there's some truth here, some facts or things that I just didn't consider before that has now opened you up to like a different perception of how personality assessments can support us.
Yeah, 100%. And now I find them valuable because I can see certain things that I can work on and take whatever resonates. So
Yeah.
definitely.
Which was the first one that you took? Curious.
The
if you remember.
one that I really went deeper into was Strength Finders, and it was very interesting to me. I had a resistance to some pieces, but I still find value in what I saw there, but I have to shift into curiosity because otherwise I would have just not gotten any value from it. So we can dive a little bit more into that process, but
Yeah.
yeah, definitely has shifted for me.
Yeah. I'll say for me, when I first got into personality assessments, I nerded out on them like right away. I was like, oh, I get to learn more about me and
Yeah.
I get to fit in this little bucket. And then I came to realize I had a perception of what bucket or what type I wanted to be, and had this moment of, well, wait, that's actually not, those aren't my natural preferences or my natural tendencies. This was like something I was aspiring to be. Like, for example, I really wanted to be a very structured, organized, like pushing for closure sort of person. Because that was a behavior that so many people that I surrounded myself with had. And I was like, oh, well, that's such a good thing to have. Like, what can I do to be more of that? And which is one point, right? It's like we can use that as a data point to say we can work towards being this. We are capable of, taking on these new behavioral patterns. They just might not be what naturally comes easiest to us. And I think making that distinction for me didn't happen early. It came like much later into my um, assessment realm.
And which one was the first one you took? I'm curious.
Probably Myers-Briggs. And
Yeah.
I know we've only gotten to work a little bit together, but you could probably imagine I'm not a traditionalist by nature. So I deemed myself as an ESTJ. I was like, oh, I'm just like Norm and I'm just like so and so. And then I was like in the work, I'm like, I'm actually more of a feeler, and I'm more of a perceiver. Like my brain doesn't go to logic right away. It's more of how decisions impact people. I also like to just kind of go with the flow and be more spontaneous with things. And I love that adrenaline rush, like right at the end of the project, which is a clear indicator that I'm a perceiver. I'm not a judger. So I thought I was an ESTJ, and then it took some more like self-actualization, realizing I'm an ESFP, so an experiencer by nature.
Gotcha. And
Mm-hmm.
that you're referring to is it type coach or is there another one that you
Yeah,
coach?
great question. So type coach, Myers-Briggs. We'll get into this a bit more, but type coach being kind of an added or an additive version of Myers-Briggs. And if we can go there a little bit, what's so cool about type coach is it allows you to have a little bit more agency in what your natural style and preferences are, which is very different from Myers-Briggs or MBTI.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point because we started this conversation when I came into the team and I was able to engage in the type coach assessment. I actually liked it. I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. And to your point, it gave some autonomy for us to have some self-awareness around, okay, where do you resonate more rather than it assigning it to me, if you will. So yeah, I was able to have some discernment and self-reflection, which was really helpful for me.
Yeah. Let's go there a bit, because when I think of self-reflection around personality assessments, there's oftentimes our brains go towards like polar opposites, right? You're either this or you're either this. And there's oftentimes this gray area, and we're a combination of all these things. So I'm curious, like when I speak to like polarity and how people love to just find what bucket they fit into, like what kind of comes up for you when I share that?
Well, in my experience, as we grow up, there are certain traits or characteristics that we have as human beings that people tend to highlight. Oh, you're very this or you're very this. And so when we take a personality assessment, in my opinion, what I experienced was I was looking for the things that would reaffirm who I thought I am based on what I've heard, right? And so I noticed at the very beginning, anything that would divert from that because I was lacking a higher level of curiosity, I would like, but people have told me that I'm this way. So then,
Right.
therefore,
This must be wrong.
This is wrong. Yeah, exactly. And the interesting part was that when I did see those come up, right, again, in the past, I'd be like, oh yeah, like that feels good. So there's nothing wrong with that. I think where I've gained a lot more value now in terms of a self-awareness practice is like, where are the opportunities, right? I think there's a confidence in, okay. And in type coach, actually in type coach, there was a cool practice where they have you write with your right hand, if that's your dominant hand. And then you do the
I love
left
that
hand.
analogy.
And I thought, it just clicked for me in a new way. I thought, okay, cool. This is really about what behavior patterns I'm good at. I got them down. I know how to
Naturally.
do that already. And
Yep.
where are the opportunities for me to build this word called, well, actually, I'll just use the term that I identify with in terms of range, right? What's the range of possibilities in terms of who and how we can operate in the world? And so now I see, okay, cool. What's my right hand? What are the things I've already locked in? And then where are the opportunities for me to develop if I choose to, if I want to, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of what's showing up there where it's saying I might have some watch outs.
What you just hit the nail on the head of there's choice involved with personality assessments, right?
Yes,
You get to
absolutely.
choose if you want to leverage your strengths more, dive deeper into those, see sometimes people call them weaknesses, but we love to call them growth opportunities because
Yeah.
it's not as fixed, right? There is space for us to grow. And I think that's such a big point for leaders to know is when you bring this forward to your teams, it's all about development. Like we're not saying you're good or bad at certain things. If we could just leave that language aside and allow for more openness of we all have natural strengths and preferences and areas for growth, it just makes it a lot more approachable and
Yeah.
humanizing it.
Yeah, that's so good. And I'm curious from your perspective, Nicole, because especially let's just with Type Coach, but other assessment that you used with clients, what are some of the things you noticed are misperceptions, if you will, or areas where
Mm,
you might see that? And it's not good or bad in terms of how they're looking at it, but there might be this type of black or white perspective on
hmm.
the view on the personality assessments. What have you seen in that space?
Great question. So, um, one, I see people putting all of their eggs in one, so to speak, personality basket, personality assessment basket. So they take, a type coach and then that defines them. That's,
Mm.
their bread and butter. That is everything that speaks to who they are as a person, which is something that we try to limit and cut off right away as a misconception that there's no personality assessment out there that can speak exactly to who you are as a human because we're so
Right.
nuanced, we're so complex, and just using each assessment tool as a data point and to get a better understanding of who you are. So again, not putting all of your eggs in one basket, whether it's type coach, Enneagram, using them as a data source just to build a better understanding of you. But also with that curiosity piece, which is so important, because if you're going in there and assuming black or white, this is who I am, people can oftentimes use it as like a crutch or an explanation as to why they're not going to do X, Y, or Z. It's just, well, I'm just not naturally good at that because this assessment says so. So,
Yep. That's so
yeah.
good. And I've used that one before, consciously and unconsciously, where it's like, let me just let that person over there do it because they've got it down. And there might be some truth to that, but I've noticed there's a way in which we can excuse ourselves from developing in certain ways
Mhm.
if we, yeah, don't take on the opportunity to work on that. So I love what you're saying, that it's obviously not black or white, but you have to, what I hear you saying is you have to want to see the opportunity for development and growth within it. Otherwise, you're not really going to find the value in it.
Yeah. Yeah, and what comes to mind is the need to find, like, balance in building effective teams. So there's opportunities, and we do a great job with this at Thaudium where, we'll put certain individuals in a role of, let's say, like, project managing. Like, there might be other individuals who just excel naturally at that, but sometimes we need to get creative with how we develop and design like our project teams so people can you know some people can leverage their strengths while others can use this new role as a growth opportunity. So you don't want to put people in roles where they're only leveraging their strengths because growth isn't happening there, right? You want to pick and intentionally choose where you're putting someone as a maybe project manager, but they're also getting opportunity to be more in the design and open space. So I think we do such a good job at that. So you can use the assessment to find balance in how you create your teams and structure them, where you're giving some people the chance to leverage strengths and then others to build their growth areas.
Gotcha. And that
Yeah,
would require, to your point, yeah, everyone having taken the same assessment so you can have some
very good
range of
point.
understanding. So
Yeah.
how would you suggest, because I'm curious about that in terms of suggesting, so if a leader is interested in bringing perhaps an assessment tool to their team, how would you suggest they approach it in terms of, one, maybe which one to choose, and then how to leverage that with their team to the point you're making in terms of assigning work and supporting each other? And then the third layer, this is a loaded question probably, is
That's okay.
the communication piece as well. How do you communicate it in a way where you actually do make the most use of it?
Yeah. I got number 2 and 3. Remind me of the first tip of the question.
Choosing an assessment.
How do you choose? Okay. I'd first start off with what's most common at the organization. You don't want to necessarily introduce a new assessment tool if people just got a little taste of the one. We really push to have a common language. So if some teams in an organization are using DISC, then our recommendation would to use DISC. So cross-functionally, it's just supporting collaboration more organically. But to your point, like finding a baseline where everyone's taking the same assessment is step one, because you could be talking kind of different languages in a way, and it requires an expert in the space to know all of the assessment tools to make connections across them. So having everyone take the same one is step one, and starting with what's already known in the organization.
Yeah, love it. And the last piece there is, what have you seen be effective and maybe ineffective as well in terms of communicating that to the team? Like, how do we make the best use of it? And I know that I've been in environments where I've been one of them actually, where I don't actually decide to engage in it as much or take it as serious, so to speak. So any tips on what you've seen work and be effective in terms of communicating it out to your teams when they decide to use them?
Yeah. I'm just having a moment like, this is fun. You've now taken the interview hat for a moment, and it's coming over to me. So this is great. I'm going to pivot back to you though in a moment to hear your 2 cents. For me though, I think letting leaders know, like, they need to preface this as a developmental tool, right? Because people, once you start to do some more introspection in a way that you're maybe not used to, and it's a little outside of your comfort zone, you can get hard on yourself. Every assessment tool is going to tell you where you might have some watch outs or some challenge areas. And when you see them on paper, it can feel like a little real and like validating in a way that can kind of diminish your confidence a little bit. So I would focus on leaders sharing that this is for your development. This is for us as a team to just better work together, recognizing we all have natural strengths, and we can also lean on each other to build our growth areas too. So for example, like when I know I need to be in like this big picture headspace, I truly think to myself, like, okay, how would Anthony maybe approach this? Big picture thinker, always his head's in the clouds. He's Mr. Strategy, where I find myself more in the details naturally. So I use it in a role modeling framing to think, okay, if I want to lean into this preference or this behavioral pattern that doesn't necessarily come natural to me, how do I see that showing up on the team? Who demonstrates that? So I'd say that would be another piece I would share with the leaders, and why, diverse teams are so effective is because we can all lean on each other in those ways. Those are the 2 things that are coming to mind right now. What would you add?
Yeah, so good. And I know you've done so much work in this within Thought Team, so that's why I was wanting to pick your brain on it. Yeah, I think definitely that. And I feel the energy that leaders bring to the assessment itself, because again, in my experience, I remember it being brought forward of, okay, cool, we're gonna use this assessment tool, we're gonna leverage it as a team. However, the leader that presented it forward, there wasn't really any. I can even tell, to be frank, is that they truly didn't even have an understanding of the assessment themselves. And so it didn't necessarily have me buy into it because I couldn't necessarily see the value. I can tell that they were just doing it because it was something they had to do. And so that in and of itself, it didn't really excite me. But
yeah, you kind of lost your audience at that point if the speaker's not bought into it.
Pretty much. And so that's where I also think a big reason why I resisted personality assessments for a long time was partially because I couldn't really feel the excitement from those that were presenting it to me. So it wasn't until someone brought it forward, explaining the value, explaining the experience they had with it, letting me know, hey, by the way, this thing isn't meant to tell you who you are. It's not meant to tell you who you're not. It's not meant to tell you what you can and cannot do or be. It's just information for you to consider. And if it doesn't resonate, by the way, if you take the whole thing and it doesn't resonate, toss it. I
Yeah.
thought, interesting. So it put me in the seat of power and choice. And what's funny about that is because I was in that seat, I was way more inclined to get curious and be open. And then I found a lot more value and got more interested in using it with a team. So I did find that to be an effective strategy in my personal experience that now has me more open to the value. So a big communication piece, yeah, that I've seen is how bought in is the individual who's presenting it forward to the team or the organization.
Yeah, that's such an important point because it starts from the top. You need whoever's like bringing it forward to have an understanding, a desire to understand it,
Right.
if not an understanding to start with. You also make me think about, like, from a communication standpoint, how to make it more approachable. I love when we bring, like, I'll use Type Coach for an example, into sessions. We have the participants think of examples or situations where these like preferences show up outside of
Mm.
work. And that's where it gets interesting because there's something about like asking um an executive to think about his dynamics at home and how these preferences, or thinking about the preferences of his partner, how those show up. Once they have like a reference that's kind of outside of work, it allows them to kind of step back and feel a little less defensive and like, oh, wait, this kind of shows up as humans too. And I actually know more about my personality and other types or styles and preferences when I think about it from that lens. So I found that to be very helpful too, is have them step out of the work environment and make connections outside of it to really get them invested
Mhm.
and interested in the content.
Yeah, that's a really good point because technically, yeah, there's a lot of behavior patterns that if they're showing up at work, if you will, or in the professional world, there are
Mm-hmm.
likely also dynamics that are present in our personal lives. So yeah, I think that's awesome context, and I've seen that be true for myself as well. Right, getting
Yeah.
feedback in the personal domain, if you will, and then connecting that and matching it up to the professional world. There's definitely connections.
Yeah, for sure. Synergies, if you will.
Yes, yes.
So tell me this, what can leaders do? Because we know it's very important that they bring the value, the why behind personality assessments. What can, like, if you had any insight to share, what can leaders do to bring that forward more so it can kind of hit with impact on their team more
Yeah.
effectively?
Yeah, well, I would say first and foremost for the individual to take it themselves, right? So walk your talk,
Step one.
practice
Yeah,
what you preach.
for
So
sure.
first and foremost that um, I think that encouraging a team or whoever we are disseminating this to bring a curiosity to it and really invite them to get curious in terms of what's there and presenting the opportunity within whatever is being brought forth. And now I'm probably generalizing in terms of how to really present, whether it's a personality assessment or not. But something, if you're going to encourage the team to utilize a tool, in this case, we know that personality assessments are so huge. That's the context here. But in general, just really bringing that curiosity, allowing people to know that they have a choice in terms of how they utilize the information.
Hmm.
But I think the biggest thing is having an understanding of what it is that we're presenting and then helping them again understand that it's not meant to be representative of who they are, whatever results they get. And then as a leader, being able to clearly articulate what's the value here that's available. If you do choose to engage here as a team together, here's what's possible. And from a point of leading by example as well is as the leaders taking the assessment themselves is to practice that curiosity and lead by example is huge.
Totally. And I think as important as curiosity is, I think empathy plays such a big piece too. So I want
Yeah.
to put a little spotlight on our series on situational intelligence.
Yes.
So we take leaders of all, I was going to say shapes and sizes, but you get me, cross functional in nature. Maybe it's intact teams, but we will take these individuals through a series of sessions or workshops around very key, like critical skills that leaders need to have to be very effective in communication, and empathy being one of them, agility. So, how can you navigate conversations and be quick to adapting your communication style based on who you're talking to? And then, thirdly, we go into influence. So, how can you better influence someone knowing their style, knowing their preferences, and how they naturally show up to a conversation? And I share this because we always start that progression with an assessment, whether it's DISC, Type Coach. Again, this is where we ask the organization, which type of assessment are you guys most familiar with? Where do you have the most energy? Of course, we can provide a recommendation. But I think empathy is so critical because one, it's like empathy for yourself. Like, hey, you're human. You have strengths. You have growth areas. We can't be everything all at once. And, for our high performers and our perfectionists, like that sentiment alone is a lot to sit with.
Mhm.
Wow. Like, you mean I can't be everything all at once and be everything for everyone? You know, like that's just, it's so strong. So even having people build empathy for themselves as humans and allowing them to recognize like other people also fall into that bucket, whether they have the same personality type or not from you, there's still a sense of empathy that you need to better connect with them and ultimately work better.
Yeah, 100%. I love that, and I think that as we're going through that series, it's really important for people to understand that people are going to have reactions in terms of whatever they see in the results too. Because I see some people will actually resonate with what's there, and
Hmm.
some people might not, and it might actually trigger something in them. And in terms of what you're sharing and situational intelligence, having empathy, not making that wrong, but helping a leader be able to hold the space in terms of what's coming up for them, and hold the empathy as well, because there's a lot of learning that comes out of these sometimes, especially when individuals might not agree with anything that's in the personality assessment.
Yeah. I'm thinking we need to change the name of this because they're not assessment tools. Because there's a lot of like negative connotation with assessment, like you're being critiqued,
Uh-huh.
you're being measured
Assessed.
on this
Yes.
scale, whoever made it. And really, it's an
Mhm.
awareness tool. It's not an assessment tool.
Yes.
So we
Yeah.
need to talk to someone to
Yeah.
get that switched,
I
I
agree.
think, as a
Whoever
takeaway.
made up the term, even as you said that, something shifted in my body. Like, oh, okay, yeah,
It's a little
that's
lighter.
awesome. I
Yeah.
agree, and that makes a solid point, because for me, I've become a lot more receptive to whatever's there, the different types of assessments. I even get curious now as to how they came up with the different personality types and the structures,
Mm-hmm.
because in the end, what I've learned is, to your point, it's really helping people build an awareness around certain behavior patterns. And then we get to consider, at least in my opinion, the results. Cool, I have these behavior patterns based on this assessment or this awareness tool, the new name, I like it. And I get to look at it. Cool, are these behavior patterns serving me? Great,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to keep doing them. Maybe I might find some that are in there that aren't serving me, and I get to choose whether I get to change them or not, or choose to change them or not. But to your point, what I get now when I do these assessments, and even coming into the thought team, engaging in the type coach, I got a lot of awareness of, wow, actually, these sound a lot like me. Here's some things to consider. And then when I looked at the places to watch out for, they did resonate as well. I thought, yep, those are some pieces that I get to look at if I choose to.
Yeah. And I think there's two like layers to that of choosing to like shift. It's either in the moment. So are these behaviors serving me in the moment or generally speaking, right? So like we can try
Yes.
our best like in the moment to think, okay, is getting into the details going to help me? Or do I need to bring my call it altitude of thinking a little bit higher? Or do I need to be in more of an open stance and like more divergent thinking? Or do I really need to push for closure in this moment? So I think that's
Yeah.
another piece is being um, choosing in the moment whether it'll support you in whatever work you're doing to be in your natural state or where you can stretch yourself a little bit and tap into an Anthony or someone else or a different behavior that would serve you.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and a couple, as you're sharing that, what came to my mind is just sharing like a couple tips, at least in my experience, in terms of potentially working with these. And one of the things I noticed for me was true is, again, based on what's been highlighted in our personalities. Oh, Jonathan is so XYZ. There's a good feeling that's associated with that. It's not that it's
Hmm.
bad, it's natural.
Yeah. What
However,
would your X, Y, and Z be if you had to just name them? What do you
let's
think
see.
someone would say?
I mean, the things that for sure, what I would consider my right hand would
Yeah.
be patient, calm, compassionate, and
Hmm.
that comes with the watch out, so to speak, of the urgency sometimes. Like for me, it's been, okay, sometimes there's an urgency that's needed when actually deadlines aren't coming up, right? So I thought,
Hmm.
okay, that's actually true. So it's interesting where my right hand, so to speak, has been developing that over my lifetime. And then there's an opportunity to balance that with bringing a little bit more urgency to deadlines or pressures when they're present, without losing the calm, compassion, or things that I've already done really well at. And so I say that to say, and I love the question, because then it gives me an opportunity to not make myself better or more evolved or more whatever, just because I have done a lot of work, if you will, to develop certain characteristics or traits. And the point I really am making there is there's a tricky way in which sometimes we might over-identify or make ourselves better than based on what we get.
Preach, brother.
in the awareness tool and the assessment. And so just watching for that. On the other side of that is, oh, I didn't get compassionate, or I didn't get productivity or whatever, and then making ourselves less than because someone else does have those things. So those are the tricky little nuances that I'm curious how you've experienced those.
Yeah. What's coming to mind initially is Grift in the back of my mind. He says, once you start comparing yourself to others, you've lost. And it's such a good sentiment, right? Because there's always going to be things that you will have as strengths and other people will have as strengths. And you just can't compare. It's always going to be apples to oranges.
So good.
Additionally, yeah, that's kind of just like what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
That's
good. It's good stuff. Yeah. I mean, those are the main things in terms of really tying it up. It is, at least my biggest lesson is to not over-identify, but not also not miss the opportunity that's available there if I choose to see it in terms of things I can develop.
Yeah. And you're bringing up how important it is to shape and choose your perspective on it. It's like, for example, when you said your 3 things, like one word that comes to mind for me is I'm very thoughtful. But you could look at that as like, this girl just thinks too much. But sometimes it serves me. I'm a very thoughtful person. I put a lot of thought into things, but sometimes it doesn't serve me where I'm overthinking on things that aren't that important. So it depends on like it's balance, it's perspective, it's curiosity, and it's giving yourself a little grace because we're all human, and strengths, growth areas, we all have them.
Yep. Love it. 100%. So good.
What headline do you want to leave the people with? Or do you feel that you are complete?
Let's see. Yeah, I think that last chunk really nailed it down. But a big theme for me lately has been choosing curiosity over being right. It's just, I believe, a more fun way to live. So that's become
and more tangible. It's more tangible because right is just kind of a moving target, and your right is different than my right. It's kind of a meta conversation we can save for another episode, right and wrong.
100%.
Exactly. Who's the voice behind those words? But I love it. Thank you so much for your energy, your passion in this area. We did pretty good on time. I will say that. We could have went further. We did good.
Yeah.
We did great.
I think we locked it in. So yeah, we can continue this conversation. Yeah, and I think for those listening, I think this can be a really cool conversation to continue to riff on. I think that especially for organizations and teams and leaders who are wanting to really develop a point of view on how to bring these assessments to their teams, it can be tricky. So we're here to support.
We're your people. We are your people.
Got you.
I love it. Thanks so much, Jonathan. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Episode 189. You can see us next Thursday and every Thursday, frankly, at 3 p.m. Central. Have a great day, and don't take your personality assessments too seriously.